Welcome to another reading from Bound to Found. This book is all about finding true freedom and restoration in life. Are you looking for restoration and true freedom? There's only one place to find that, and that's in Jesus Christ. Here in this book, the author, Hector Perez, knows this path all too well. He tells of his 40-year journey wandering in his life, going through broken relationships, addictions, and afflictions, major losses, and even temporary successes that never seem to fill the endless void. After many years of feeling bound and broken by years of bad decisions, Hector finds the answer and turns his life around. He shares with you not only this powerful story of his restoration, but also a step-by-step process of how to go from bound to free and from broken to restored. Today we're going to be reading from chapter 3. The title of this chapter is Temptation. I do have permission from the author to record these videos, to read his book, to share it, because this is information that God gave him, and he just wants to get it out there. He wants to share his testimony with everybody so that they can see by example how God set him free from addictions, from a life of just being bound, and now he walks in total freedom. Chapter 3, Temptation. The enticement of temptation is the reason we are slaves of sin. It is through our weakness that we disobey God. It does not matter if we have lived a life of privilege, a life full of hardships, or both. The temptation is still in our lives. The desire to have more and be more is inherent in all of us. As such, we are vulnerable to temptation. The less we can resist temptation, the more likely we are to end up in low the bar. I consider myself an excellent example of the perils of being enticed by my natural desires. My life was not privileged, nor was it miserable. Life was good to me as I grew up in Alice, Texas during the 1950s and 1960s. Alice was a small town with a predominantly Hispanic community that was figuratively divided by the Union Pacific Railroad tracks. The railroad tracks split Alice, Texas geographically and racially. Most of the Hispanic families lived on the south side of the tracks, while the Anglo families lived on the tracks' north side. In my first 6 years of public schooling, all my classmates were Hispanic. I did not have non-Hispanic descent classmates until I entered junior high school. However, discrimination was never something that I encountered while growing up. My father was one of the few Hispanic business owners in town, so my family was well known. He owned a Borden's milk distributorship and delivered dairy products to supermarkets, convenience stores, schools, and restaurants. And because I have 3 sisters and no brothers, I was always with my father in the milk truck since I was 6 years old. While my friends could stay home and watch cartoons on Saturday mornings and enjoy their summer vacation from school, I was always working on the milk route. Even in my senior year of high school, I worked half a day and then went to school in the afternoon. I remember many times when we were eating at the kitchen table, my father would tell me, "One day, this business will be yours." I felt obligated to take over the family business, and I did not want to let my father down. He had worked hard for 20 years to build up the business, and now he wanted me to continue his legacy. But I felt that my free will and freedom to choose my life path had eluded me. Free will and freedom often are used interchangeably, but there are distinct differences between the two terms. Free will is our birthright to make our decisions, while freedom is our ability to exercise free will. The freedom that I wanted at that kitchen table was to determine and make my own decisions and plans. I wanted to use my free will. Free will is natural in all people, but I felt that my father was restraining me and suppressing my free will to choose between taking over the business or attending college. The burden of responsibility was heavy on my shoulders, and I desired freedom from it. At the age of 13, I made a decision that would affect me, my family, my future wives and children, my finances, and my physical and spiritual freedom. I chose to light a marijuana joint and get high for the first time in my life. At the age of 13, I had not heard of the promise of blessings I could have if I would choose God and put Him first. Instead, I had accepted the lies of the devil who told me drugs are good and will make me happy, and that I will have friends and be liked by everyone if I chose a life of drugs. And for 27 years, I believed this lie. In those 27 years, my whole life revolved around drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. At the age of 13, I did not hear an audible voice telling me to choose the drugs, but the temptation was the same one that Eve succumbed to in the Garden of Eden. Now, the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. God knows that your eyes will be opened in the day you eat of it, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took its fruit and ate. She also gave her husband with her, and he ate. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. That is found in Genesis 3, 1 through 7. The devil's tactics have not changed since the first lie of betrayal in the garden. The lust of the eyes, the fruit was pleasant to the eyes. The lust of the flesh, the fruit was good for food. And the pride of life, desirable to make one wise, were the temptations the devil used to ensnare Eve. These temptations were not in my thoughts when I reached for that joint offered to me and smoked it. I still remember the person who gave me that first joint. I remember where I was when I lit that first joint and who smoked it with me. And I still remember the euphoric feeling I got after I finished smoking it. At that moment, I thought to myself, is this the freedom and peace I have been looking for? Like most 13-year-old boys, I had a low self-image of myself. In fact, the fact that I was always the smallest in my class did not help my self-image. I was short and skinny, and I was self-conscious. But smoking that joint became an escape from low self-esteem, and I felt empowered and confident when I was around my peers. With every drag of smoke I took, I thought, if freedom was feeling good about myself, if freedom was escaping my problems, and if freedom was confidence around other people, drugs were for me. One of the benefits of working on the milk row was that I always had money to buy drugs. I did not have to feel to buy the freedom I was experiencing from getting high. My father decided that we needed a larger property to park our 2 delivery milk trucks around this time. So we sold our house in the city and bought a house on 4 acres about 5 miles outside the city limits. And as a young teenager looking for places to get high in, I found that our 4 acres gave me a lot of freedom. I had plenty of places to hide and smoke weed. It was easy for me to hide my drug use from my parents. Dad was a hard worker and a good material provider, but he was also a heavy drinker and womanizer. So after work days, he was usually with his friends at the beer joints. My mother was a typical submissive housewife, cooking, cleaning, and raising her kids. Because they were both always busy, I could go to the back of the property and get high, and no one would notice. So my life was full, working and getting high for the next couple of years. But once I got to high school, my freedom went to a higher level. I got my driver's license. The year was 1973. My drug use went from smoking weed and cigarettes to alcohol, cocaine, LSD, meth, heroin, barbiturates, peyote, and speed. It was my junior year in high school, and my father gave me an option. He told me to quit the high school band to work full-time on the milk route, and he would buy me a new car. Talk about freedom. Driving a brand new car with money in my pocket and a baggie full of weed? There would be no stopping me now. It was even more tempting. With my car, I could go anywhere I wanted. So I quit the high school band, and we drove to the local Ford dealership. He purchased a brand new Ford Mustang for $3,500 from the showroom. Of course, with the understanding that I would help pay for it with my salary as a milkman. The first time that I drove that brand new Ford Mustang onto the school parking lot was a high that no one could take away from me. Even with the high amount of drug use, my school grades were A's and B's, and I was always in the accelerated classes. Math was my favorite subject, and I have always been good with numbers. Algebra, geometry, trigonometry, it came easy for me. I felt that the plan of freedom that I had laid out for my life was going well. Little did I know that God had plans and a purpose for this skinny, stoned teenager who thought he was free. The Bible says in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." We might allow the temptation to rule our lives, and we might think that God does not care, but He is merely waiting for us to acknowledge Him. But back then, I did not know or understand God and the blessed life that comes with living in God's presence. Looking back to my Algebra 2 class in my junior year, I can see how God's plan for freedom was already in place. Unbeknownst to me, this Algebra 2 class and my teacher would have significantly impact in my life. The math class was in my 4th period schedule, and it was right after lunch. Back then, we had an open campus, and we could go off campus for lunch. Every day of that school year, my friends and I would smoke some joints, drop some acid, or take some Quaaludes, then get a quick bite to eat and head back to class, high as a kite. I would try to hide behind the student in front of me, but when my teacher asked for a volunteer to go up to the chalkboard and solve a complicated formula, it seemed that she would always pick me. More times than not, I would get the right answer, and she would put her trademark at the end of the equation. Her mark of approval was QED, quite easily done. At this point in my life, this trademark defined how I felt my life was going, QED. I got this. Got my drugs, my brand new Mustang, and got some money. This must be freedom. My teacher's name was Ernestine Glossbrunner. a longtime educator in our community. After she retired from teaching, she was elected as a state representative and served our community for many years. Once she retired from the House of Representatives, she was honored by having a prison named after her. The Ernestine Glossbrenner Unit in San Diego, Texas, stands as a memorial for this teacher that did not know I was high in her class every day. This prison is 10 miles from my hometown. I would spend 23 years in and out of this prison to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with the housed inmates. As the Bible says in Proverbs 16:9, in their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. If someone had told me in 1973 that this teacher would have a prison named after her namesake, and I would be going there to tell the prisoners about the person who set me free from drugs and alcohol, I would never have believed them. I was at the top of the world back then. I had money, a girlfriend, a massive social circle, and a new car. After high school, I married my first wife in October of 1974. Getting married was not my choice. My father told me to marry my girlfriend and take over the business. So I did. All my friends were going to college and they were excited. Yet there I was, stuck at home, married. It was like the freedom to attend college and develop personal gifts, skills, and talents all swallowed up by the milk truck. The freedom to choose a career path and work in corporate America and climb the ladder to success was taken away by the family tradition that said my father was a milkman so that I would also be a milkman. All my dreams and all the regrets for missing out in a life outside of the milk business wafted inside of me, like the gallons of bottled milk I sold every day for 20 years. A few years later, in 1977, my first son, Joseph Andre, was born. But doing the milk route every day can be tedious, so that I would roll 3 or 4 joints. By 1979, I wanted to be out of the business, so I started threatening to sell the company because I did not want to be a milkman anymore. I was also having problems with my marriage because I was always working and having affairs. So I walked out of her and my 2-year-old son's life. And in 1980, I had 2 other girlfriends, both of whom I got pregnant. One was unwilling to share her plans with me, and the other said I would have to decide whether we would have the baby. I chose not to have the baby, and we drove to an abortion clinic in San Antonio. Sitting in the waiting room and waiting for them to call my girlfriend to the back, I heard a voice tell me, "Get out of there." It was one of a few times back then that I listened to the voice. So I told her that we would go back home and tell her father that we would get married. So we got out of there and got married. That baby, Mario Javier, is now a law partner. And when I look back, I am thankful that I did listen to that voice. In 1983, our second son, Marcus Randall, was born. He is now a petroleum engineer. In 1985, my second wife just got tired of my drinking and drug use, and we were divorced. Both marriages lasted 5 years, and while the first divorce was hard, the second one hurt even more. When driving my milk delivery route, thoughts of suicide crossed my mind. I thought about crashing into oncoming vehicles. I had no concerns about the consequences of this action because I was hurting so badly. It was then that my drug use skyrocketed. The drugs and alcohol clouded my love for my sons, and I could not give my wives the support they needed. I was a good provider, but I was not there to provide them with emotional support. I am glad that my sons had their stepdads who stepped in and gave them the help I could not. All that time, I thought I had freedom, but I did not know that I was a slave to temptation and sin. I may have had physical freedom, but I made the wrong choices that caused pain and suffering to the people around me. I was tempted with worldly things and failed to use my free will appropriately. Instead of choosing God's path, I wanted drugs and alcohol. So wrong choice after wrong choice brought me to Lodabar, a place of shame and regret. And my time in Lodabar affected my family. It was not just my shame, but theirs as well. That ends the reading of chapter 3. But before I end this video, I want to read this about the author. It says, for the past 24 years, Hector Perez has ministered to tens of thousands of people in different settings. As a licensed and ordained minister with an MA in theology and biblical studies, he founded and pastored Freedom House Ministry. As a certified chaplain, he has worked as a hospital chaplain at 3 different hospitals, and he is now working as a hospice chaplain. As a Texas Department of Criminal Justice chaplaincy volunteer and a prisoner re-entry crisis counselor, he has ministered in prisons and jails all across Texas. He founded Cell Block to City Block, a prison ministry and re-entry program. As a board-certified restorative therapist, he is the founder and executive director of Untitled Chaplain Services, a company that offers corporate chaplaincy services to companies and their employees. Hector and his wife Hope reside in Corpus Christi, Texas. Together they have 5 children, Belinda, Monica, Joseph, Mario, and Randy. They also have been blessed with 15 grandchildren and 1 great-grandson. I pray that this has blessed you, and whatever God has spoke to you from it, that you allow Him to work in your life, that you just surrender to Him. Allow yourself to receive the freedom that He's extending to you. The book, From Bound to Found, is all about finding true freedom and restoration in life, in your life. You can purchase this book on Amazon.com. It's not by accident that you're watching this. God has a plan and a purpose for you. His plan is greater than anything you could ever think, dream, or imagine. Give Him a chance. Receive your freedom. Trust the Lord. Surrender to Him. Many blessings to you. I'll see you next time for the next reading.